That is the most ludicrous introduction I have ever heard. So, we're going to be looking with you at the book of Psalms today, but here's where I want to start. And it's a little dangerous to start here because it was a long time ago that I was in college. But here's what college was like for me. See if any of you can relate. By the time I was a junior, I had changed my major twice. Yep. I pulled up, I added 2 double minors. I worked a part-time job. I was involved in a number of extracurricular activities. One night, I went over to my best friend's dorm room, and we were chatting. She used the bathroom. I looked at her calendar and discovered that she was currently dating my boyfriend. Yep. Yeah, these things happen. He is not my husband. I juggled classes like a jigsaw puzzle to try to get everything to fit in so that I could graduate. I navigated issues back at home when I was in college. I was a TA for some classes, and then I was working on what kind of career would I have after college and how I would apply to grad school. And while I was doing all of this, everybody kept telling me, these are the best years of your life. Really? Well, if that's true, then you're going to peak at 25, and you should just know that the rest of your life is downhill. These are the best years of your life are spoken by people like me at my age who remember fondly through a mirror darkly what it was really like. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the book of Psalms from a different perspective this morning. Because while Psalms is one of the most familiar books in the Old Testament and one of the most widely used, both in Jewish culture and for those of you that grew up in Sunday school, may have been some of the first verses you ever read and memorized. It is the source of many of our responsive readings where collectively as a community we stand up and read aloud the words of Scripture for a very powerful result. And it offers us comfort and nurture and joy and praise. And the Hebrew word telehim, which is the word for the book of Psalms, means praise. But here's the problem. In the book of Psalms, there are more psalms of lament than there are psalms of praise. This really is a book of the Bible that we should ask God for a refund on. The title does not match what you're reading inside. There's a great contradiction in the book of Psalms that ought to inform us in view of our relationship to God, because I think when God orchestrated putting the book of Psalms together, that was exactly his point. And perhaps what's really true is that the authentic way to praise is through lament. Not by avoiding it, not by renaming it, not by chirping God is great over it, but actually going through it. And unfortunately, much of what passes for Christian piety is nothing more than sentimental, romanticized spirituality that is more like a drug we use to medicate our pain than a relationship forged with the living God. Here's the truth that we find in the book of Psalms. Abrasiveness is actually needed for the human experience. There is in you and I an untamed darkness that must be acknowledged and embraced. And the Psalms refuses to let us ignore or deny this. In one of the most brilliant works on exegetical perspectives on Psalms, Walter Brueggemann gave us a framework to understand what the point of the whole book was by saying there are actually 3 types of Psalms in the book. The first is the Psalms of orientation. The second is the Psalms of disorientation, which are the largest. And then there are the Psalms of or new orientation. The Psalms of orientation are the ones that we're familiar with. They are Psalms 23, where Jesus is portrayed and God is portrayed as a gentle shepherd who takes little lammies by water. And when we are tired and hurting, these are wonderfully nurturing psalms. In Psalms chapter 33, there are wonderful passages about how good God is. In Psalm 145, it says, "One generation shall commend your works to another. They will declare your mighty acts, the glorious splendor of your majesty." Psalms of orientation help us to understand how the world is a safe place, how it is created by and presided over a good God who created a well-ordered, reliable, and life-giving world. And that is true. The problem is that you and I live in a broken version of that world. So these Psalms now of disorientation inform us greatly. These Psalms of what to do when life gets hard, what to do when we have questions and doubt, what to do when we only want somebody to see the shiny side of us and not the other side of us. So, like I said, I didn't marry that jerk that was dating my best friend. Can't decide who was the bigger jerk, him or her. Word's still out on that one. I don't know. I have not yet decided. But when I was dating my husband, John and I met on a blind date when we were both in grad school, separate grad schools. And we had been dating just a couple of months, still once or twice a week, where everything's a first date and everything's polished and looks great. And about 3 months into our dating, he called me on a Saturday afternoon and he said, hey, the meeting that was planned for tonight got canceled. I happen to be free tonight. How about if I just sort of spontaneously drop over? And I said, well, you can, but here's what you're going to find when you arrive. I have been changing the wallpaper in my apartment with my roommate all day long. It was my brilliant idea that once we stripped the old wallpaper, before we put the new wallpaper up, we would get cans of spray paint and do graffiti all over the wall. I thought that would be fun. And it was, until we tried to put the new wallpaper up and it bled right through. Yeah, note to self. So I'm in my overalls. I haven't put any makeup on today. My hair's in a ponytail. I'm not wearing my contacts. I haven't showered. That's what you're going to find when you get here. He had never seen that Nancy before. I had never showed him that Nancy before. I was deeply afraid what he would do when he met her. And so, what I felt like was a defining moment in our relationship. To him, 6 months later, after we had been dating for a while, he reflected on that time and he said, the way I grew up, I thought it was very odd that you knew I was coming and you didn't get in the shower and get all fixed up. Like, yeah, I don't understand that. I don't understand why I would do that. It was time. Now, to his credit, when he walked through the door, he said and did all the right things. Guys, listen to me. Here's what he said. Pay deep attention right now. You might want to take notes. You might want to actually have this tattooed somewhere where you can get to it easily. He said, I love every look of you. Now that's, but it's the right answer, guys. I love it when you're dressed up and your hair is beautiful and you've got makeup on. And I love it when you're in your overalls and you're frustrated about the graffiti you put on the wall and you have no makeup on. Because here's the test. Our biggest fear is that after showing somebody the best side of us, which is what we almost always present with, when they see the other side of me, they're going to leave. And what we want more than anything else in the world is somebody who will see both of those places together and stay and love us right down the seam of those two people. That's what we hunger for. That's what happened in Genesis chapter 3 when right after God created this gorgeous place for Adam and Eve to live, right afterwards, it took them just a couple of verses to mess the whole thing up. And they did what you always do in Psalms of disorientation when life is hard and there is pain and you have sinned. They hide. And then God seeks them to say, not only in your perfection do I love you, but in your sin I will find you and follow you. And in perhaps the most brave and courageous verse of the entire scripture, when God said to Adam, where are you? Adam had the strength to say, here I am. These Psalms of disorientation are so necessary for our spiritual journey. They are words of deep anguish that reveal alienation and suffering and loss and death. And they can be anywhere on a scale of 1 to 10. It can be a small thing and a large thing. Your challenge as Christ followers for the rest of your lives is to figure out how to bring this experience in your life into your faith journey with God. The Psalms of disorientation are unutterable words, unthinkable thoughts, desperate voices, cries of rage, disbelief, mourning, and wailing. They are the dark night of the soul, and they get glossed over by so many people who follow Christ. When you have the time, take a look at Psalm 109, Psalm 58, and Psalm 88. And I defy any church in America to use these as responsive readings, putting on the side screens and inviting people to stand up and to say in unison, I hope my enemy melts like a snail in the middle of a hot day. I hope his teeth fall out of his head. I hope his child is stillborn. These two are the word of the Lord, and they are put there expressly for the purpose of helping us to understand that we are called to live in an authentic and vulnerable relationship with God in order for us to transform. Because you see, transformation doesn't predominantly happen in the Psalms of orientation or even in the following Psalms of new orientation. But primarily, our transformation happens when we live in the Psalms of disorientation, when we express honestly to God, when we learn how to contain it and hold it in when we need to, when we take time to reflect on it, when we use grace and truth over time to let God use our pain to change us. A couple of years ago, I went through one of the most difficult seasons in my life. And I don't have a whole lot of time to go into it, but let's just put it in this category. Somebody who I loved more than I love myself was on a journey so far away from God and so far away from me that the pain was indescribable. And while learning to give voice to the pain was important, it was not easy. And one weekend, everybody in my family except my son and I found ourselves at home, and so we decided we were going to drive up the coast and spend a couple of nights up there and just get away. My son was really kind of oblivious to what was going on in my life. My son's 25. I tell him that's 16 in girl years. So, just a little slower on the uptake. So he was happy, came with me, and interestingly enough, as soon as the car pointed north away from my home, I felt calmer and less anxious. So we get up there, we have a good time together, we watch, what was that movie a couple years ago, like 28 Hours Later, some zombie horror movie that my son put on his computer. It was awesome. Just totally taking my mind off of my pain. But then, when our time got done and we turned the car south to go home, I could feel the anxiety rise in me. We stopped on a cloudy afternoon at the mouth of the Russian River where it goes into the Pacific Ocean, and Johnny, who is a magnificent surfer, went out into the water to surf, and I decided to walk up and down the beach in the most raw pain I have ever lived in my life. And so I'm walking by myself, and all of a sudden, a church bus pulls up at the beach, and a bunch of high school kids, high on Jesus, get out. Now I'm trying. This is from my perspective. Remember, I was in pain. It was not pretty. And a couple of them wrote in big letters in the sand, "The Lord is my shepherd." And I walked by it, and I had a little bit of an out-of-body experience, picturing it like a movie, like this should be a moment for me where I see that, and I'm healed a bit, and I surrender to God as the shepherd in my life. Only that's not so much how it played out. I walked by it, and in my pain, which of course leads to cynicism and sarcasm and all kinds of lovely things, I said to God, "Oh, you're a shepherd, all right." And then I gave it an adjective that started with an SH and ended with a TY and had it in the middle. And I said, "Do you like the alliteration? You're a shepherd." Yeah, that's the kind of shepherd. That's the shepherd I'm experiencing you to be right now in my life. And I spent the next half hour walking up and down the beach saying that phrase over and over again like a psalm Now, when my son came across me, he's like, "What are you doing? You're muttering." It's like, "You're too young to know what I have been doing right now. Let's just have lunch and get in the car and go home." And as I reflect on that, and as I read Psalm 109 and 58 and 88, I think I was in good company. I think I was wrestling with God out of necessity. I think I might have been doing some of the most profound faith work in my entire life. And I'm guessing that all the angels God uses to send messages down to us were freaking out a little bit, and God was like, "Don't worry, she does this all the time. She'll be fine. Let her go, let her spin. It's gonna be fine." There is something not only healing, but there is something utterly necessary about Psalms of disorientation. In fact, in Psalm 39, the psalmist is so wounded by God, he basically says, "I would like you to go away so that I could be happy again. Because the only way I will ever be happy again, God, is if you get out of my life." And this, too, is the word of the Lord. New York Times carried an article a couple years ago about a 13-year-old girl named Ashlyn, who was actually born with a genetic anomaly that does not allow her to feel pain. And at first blush, a symptom like that, which sounds so wonderful, you realize has caused her such incredible disfigurement and difficulty in her life. From the time she was a little girl, she would chew pieces of her tongue off. Her mother would have to wrap her hands in bandages. As she got older and would cook in the kitchen, she would forget and grab a spoon in boiling water. Her life was miserable because she could not feel pain. And the physician that they interviewed her, that had treated her for so many years, said about her how complicated a life can get without the guidance of pain. That pain is a gift, and Ashlyn doesn't have it. Here is the gift that pain is. And Lord knows the world needs some authentic Christian leaders in it. The gift of pain disassembles our actual self and shows us the gap between that and our desired self. Faith is not a vision that keeps us away from suffering, but it gives us the strength to walk through the pain and to be there with God and with others and alone sometimes. Pain is what strips us of our ego and our anger and our fear and begins to replace it genuinely with the strength of Jesus. And then there are these psalms also that offer us, on the other side of orientation and disorientation, what Brueggemann calls the new orientation, which is not a return to the old stable orientation, because there is no going back to the pre-candor situation. But we find that in the midst of loss and darkness and death over time, God is amazingly present. We learn that in our darkest places of disorientation, more than anything else, a newness not of our own making breaks upon us. And that faith in the depths eventually transforms us. And if we move too quickly through it, we will limit the growth that only disorientation can provide and end up risk living in superficial and artificial ways rather than in authentic, life-transforming, and culture-shaping ways. The Psalms of Lament are not to be saved for Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. The Jewish people that read them knew that they were as much a part of their daily rhythm in their life with God as praise and joy were. These rhythms of Psalms are not to be saved, but they're to be reflected on in the whole of our life. And they are beautifully reflected in the life of Jesus, who in his own disorientation in the Garden of Gethsemane said, "Anything you can do, Father, to take this cup away from me." He prayed in his anguish so earnestly that it says his sweat was like drops of blood. And his further disorientation in Mark chapter 15 when he cried out, "Why have you forsaken me?" And Jesus' voice echoed Psalm 109 and 58 and 88 and 39 and my own alliteration on the beach. Even God's Son entered into this rhythm. And so I would challenge you, as you are here for these 4 years or 5, perhaps if that's necessary, that you will, as a community, embrace the truth about the pain that you find yourselves in, that you will learn to be alone with God in it and together in community with it, and that maybe even more importantly than that, that because these aren't necessarily the best years of your life, that you will save this framework of disorientation into the whole of your life until you are old men and women who have grown so old well with God because you have embraced the pain and found God in it.